Late March 1945. Southern Germany. The roads are narrow here, still frozen from winter. Mud clings to tank treads and boots alike. Engines idle low beneath overcast skies as columns of American armor stretch through villages whose names barely appear on Allied maps. At the front of it all is General George S. Patton's Third Army, moving fast, moving aggressively, pushing deeper into the collapsing heart of the Third Reich than anyone expected. Bridges are taken before they can be blown. German resistance appears, breaks, and vanishes. Each mile gained feels irreversible. Far ahead of Patton's spearheads, another man is moving, quietly, obsessively, surrounded by shrinking circles of loyalists and guards. Adolf Hitler, no longer commanding a global empire, no longer confident in distance or safety. His world has narrowed to maps, trains, roads, and time. Between them lies geography, timing, and decisions made under pressure. They will never meet. But for a brief moment in the spring of 1945, history bends close enough that a single wrong turn, on either side, might have changed how the war ended and how the world remembered it. And to understand how that moment became possible, we must first step back into the final collapse of Nazi Germany. By early 1945, the war in Europe had entered its final, violent acceleration. The Western Allies had crossed the Rhine. The barrier that German planners once believed would hold for months collapsed in days. Entire German formations surrendered without orders. Others fought briefly, then melted away into forests and towns already marked by defeat. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower had chosen a broad front strategy: pressure everywhere, advance steadily, deny Germany any chance to regroup. It was methodical, cautious, designed to minimize surprises. George S. Patton did not think this way. Patton's Third Army, unleashed after the breakout from Normandy months earlier, had become the most aggressive instrument on the Western Front. Speed was its weapon, shock its method. Patton pushed his commanders hard, sometimes recklessly, driving armored columns forward even when fuel ran low and flanks stretched thin. In March 1945, that aggressiveness paid dividends. As other Allied armies paused to reorganize after crossing the Rhine, Patton surged east and southeast, tearing through the Saar, Franconia, and Thuringia. German defensive lines were bypassed instead of battered. Headquarters were captured intact. Roads intended for retreat became avenues of collapse. German command and control disintegrated under the pressure. Orders from Berlin arrived too late, or not at all. Army group commanders no longer trusted their own maps. What remained of the Wehrmacht fought locally, disconnected from any coherent strategy. At the same time, Eisenhower deliberately turned Allied focus away from Berlin. The city, he believed, would fall to the Soviets regardless. The priority was southern Germany, its industrial regions, its transportation hubs, and its symbolic Nazi strongholds. And that decision, meant to end the war efficiently, would open a dangerous geographical window. Because southern Germany was not just terrain. It was where Adolf Hitler still believed safety might be found. As Patton's armored columns pushed deeper into regions never meant to see American tanks, the physical distance between the Third Army and the Nazi leadership began to shrink, not by design, but by momentum. And to understand how close those paths came, we must look at where Hitler was and why he was still moving at all. By the winter of 1944-45, Adolf Hitler no longer ruled Germany from a single, fixed center. Berlin was still the capital, but it was no longer secure. Allied bombers reduced entire districts to rubble. Soviet artillery could already be heard in the eastern suburbs by early spring. Each day, the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery became less a command post and more a tomb. Yet Hitler resisted confinement. He believed movement meant survival. For years he had rotated between headquarters, Berlin, the Wolf's lair in East Prussia and his Alpine retreat in Bavaria. The Berghof, perched above Berchtesgaden, had once symbolized dominance and distance from danger. By 1945, it symbolized denial. Hitler still saw southern Germany as defensible, loyal, and geographically protective. Nazi command planners quietly prepared fallback zones in Bavaria and Austria, mountain terrain, narrow passes, areas where Allied armor would struggle and where remaining SS units might regroup. On paper, it was a final redoubt. In reality, it was an illusion. Hitler's actual movements during these months were erratic. Trains departed late or were cancelled. Security details changed routes with little notice. Orders were issued, then reversed within hours. As communications collapsed, so did predictability. Meanwhile, Patton's advance did not respect German assumptions. His armored spearheads raced through central Germany at speeds few believed possible. Third Army reconnaissance units seized road junctions before German units even knew they were threatened. Patton's command posts often moved daily, sometimes twice in the same day. Geography tightened the gap. Southern Germany's road network funneled movement into limited corridors. Rail lines converged through cities like Nuremberg, Regensburg, and Munich. Rivers and forests that once promised defense now constrained retreat. Every decision, every turn, forced men and machines closer together. At no point did Patton know how near he was to the Nazi leadership. At no point did Hitler understand how rapidly American armor was approaching the regions he still considered safe. But in war, proximity does not require intention. It requires momentum. And as the distance narrowed, the war produced a convergence, one shaped by leadership, psychology, and chance. To understand how that convergence nearly became something more, we must now examine the different forces at work on both sides of the map. George S. Patton lived for pursuit. By the spring of 1945, the war had confirmed his deepest belief that speed shattered enemies faster than firepower. He was tireless, obsessive, and visibly frustrated by any order that slowed momentum. Patton slept little. He studied maps constantly. When his columns halted, he demanded to know why. He believed the enemy was already beaten. The only danger in his mind was hesitation. Adolf Hitler, by contrast, was physically deteriorating. Tremors shook his hands. His posture sagged. He trusted fewer people by the day. Movement no longer energized him. It unsettled him. Every relocation felt like an admission that the war had slipped beyond control. Patton delegated aggressively. Corps commanders were given objectives, not instructions. If roads were blocked, they found new ones. If resistance appeared, they bypassed it. The Third Army functioned as a machine designed to exploit chaos. Hitler centralized everything. Even as communications collapsed, he insisted on approving minor movements personally. Entire divisions waited for orders that never came. Commanders feared acting without permission more than they feared defeat. The psychological angle. Momentum defined Patton's world. Every mile gained reinforced confidence. Every enemy surrender confirmed his belief that Germany was finished. Isolation defined Hitler. Reports grew darker, yet he dismissed them as lies. Reality narrowed. His decisions became reactions, delayed, emotional, and increasingly disconnected from the battlefield. Two leaders. Two psychological trajectories. Both moving through the same shrinking space. And as these human and leadership forces collided with terrain and time, the near encounter became not just possible, but plausible. Because psychology alone does not bring armies together. Tactics do. And those tactics now demand closer examination. Patton's advance relied on reconnaissance more than mass. Light armored cars and cavalry units raced ahead of main formations, probing roads, bridges, and towns. When resistance appeared light, columns pushed through immediately. When resistance stiffened, Patton bypassed it, leaving infantry to follow. German defenders often mistook these spearheads for isolated units until entire divisions arrived behind them. By the time German command realized the depth of the penetration, retreat routes were already compromised. What remained of the German army in central and southern Germany was fragmented. Volkssturm units defended towns without coordination. Regular army units lacked fuel and transport. SS formations moved independently, often unaware of neighboring units' positions. No single German force had a complete picture of Patton's movements. No single headquarters understood where Hitler was likely to be next. This blindness mattered, because it meant there was no deliberate buffer between the advancing Americans and the Nazi leadership, only coincidence and collapsing infrastructure. Had Patton captured Hitler alive, the war would have ended differently, not militarily but symbolically. A public trial would have reshaped memory, suicide would have been denied, martyrdom avoided. But Patton was not hunting Hitler. He was hunting victory. His orders emphasized territory, not individuals. Road choices, bridge demolitions delayed by minutes, trains rerouted or canceled. Each decision shifted paths slightly, sometimes by only a few miles. And in late March and early April 1945, those miles mattered, because the war was now compressing toward a decisive moment. A point where timing, geography, and command decisions intersected. That intersection, the closest moment, lies ahead. March 28, 1945. Patton's Third Army is no longer advancing, it is surging. American armored divisions pour through central Germany with a speed that defies conventional planning. Town after town falls in hours, not days. Bridges are seized intact. German resistance collapses before it can organize. The front line, once carefully mapped, becomes meaningless. Patton's command post shifts constantly. Orders are brief. Directions are simple, keep moving. To the southeast, Bavaria grows closer with every mile. The region still carries symbolic weight for the Nazi leadership, home of early party power, mountain terrain thought defensible, and the Berghof, Hitler's alpine retreat above Berchtesgaden. At the same time, Hitler's world is contracting. By late March, his movements are increasingly constrained by Allied air power. Trains travel at night or not at all. Roads are cratered. Security details argue over routes and destinations. Orders to relocate are drafted, revised, and canceled. There are moments, documented in post-war records, when Hitler considers moving south, when contingency plans reference Bavaria and Austria as fallback zones, when senior aides quietly prepare for departure even as Hitler hesitates. Meanwhile, Patton's spearheads approach critical transportation corridors, junctions through which any southward movement would have to pass. Recon units push beyond expected limits. Maps are outdated. German units defending these corridors are undermanned and confused. No single moment defines the convergence yet. But the distance between Patton's forward elements and Hitler's potential routes is shrinking to hours, not days. And as March turns to April, the margin for error disappears. Because the war is no longer about fronts. It is about minutes. Early April 1945. The moment passes without announcement. Patton's Third Army stands at a crossroads, literally and figuratively. Orders from Eisenhower redirect the operational focus. The priority is no longer a deep thrust into the Bavarian heartland. It is containment, securing flanks, preventing scattered German forces from regrouping in the south. Patton protests, but he obeys. His armored columns pivot slightly north and east, a small adjustment on a map, a minor change in direction measured in miles. Yet in the compressed geography of collapsing Germany, it is decisive. At nearly the same time, Hitler makes his own choice. The southern option, the mountains, the Berghof, the illusion of a final redoubt, is abandoned. Whether through fear of encirclement, mistrust of his own commanders, or simple paralysis, Hitler remains tied to Berlin. By April 16, the Soviets begin their final assault on the capital. Any realistic chance of moving south disappears under artillery fire and encroaching armies. The near encounter dissolves not in drama, but in divergence. Patton advances elsewhere. Hitler stays put. Post-war analysis reveals just how narrow the window had been. American reconnaissance units had reached transportation corridors through which any southward Nazi movement would have passed. German defensive units between Patton and Hitler were thin, disorganized, and in some cases already surrendering. Had Patton continued southeast with full momentum, he might not have captured Hitler, but he would have shattered the final assumption of distance. The encounter would no longer have been theoretical. But war is governed as much by restraint as by aggression. Command decisions, strategic priorities, the discipline to stop advancing even when success seems possible. The moment slips into history unfulfilled. Yet its implications remain. Because what did not happen now shapes what did. And the consequences of that missed convergence echo into the final weeks of the war. After the divergence, the war accelerated toward its end, but along paths already chosen. Patton's Third Army continued its relentless drive, but now within tighter strategic boundaries. His forces secured central Germany, overran remaining industrial zones, and captured thousands of prisoners who no longer believed the war could be won. Resistance became sporadic. Entire German units surrendered at the first contact. Others disintegrated before contact was ever made. Patton, outwardly confident, never fully abandoned the belief that opportunities were being missed. He suspected, correctly, that the German collapse was deeper than Allied planners understood. Yet discipline prevailed. The Third Army did not race unchecked into Bavaria. It stabilized the front, secured supply lines, and prepared for a war that was now clearly in its final phase. For Hitler, the consequences were absolute. By mid-April 1945, Berlin was encircled. Soviet artillery thundered day and night. The Führerbunker became a sealed environment, cut off from reality, from accurate information, and from escape. Messages arriving from the south spoke of American forces advancing through regions once thought secure. The idea of a Bavarian refuge evaporated. The contrast was stark. Patton's world expanded outward, territory gained, prisoners taken, momentum sustained. Hitler's world collapsed inward, rooms shrinking, options vanishing, decisions reduced to denial. Post-war German records and Allied intelligence assessments would later confirm how fragmented Nazi command had become. No coordinated plan existed to move Hitler south. No armored reserve stood ready to shield him. The routes were exposed, the assumptions false. The near encounter, once measured in hours and miles, now existed only on paper, visible only in hindsight. Yet its shadow lingered. Because the war did not end with capture or confrontation. It ended with silence beneath Berlin and surrender across Europe. And in that silence, historians began asking what might have been different, had one decision on one day gone another way. By late April 1945, the consequences of that near encounter had become fully apparent. Patton's Third Army had reached the Danube and pushed into southern Germany, capturing key cities such as Nuremberg and Munich. Rail and road hubs fell into American hands. Thousands of German soldiers surrendered en masse. Yet Hitler remained unreachable, trapped in Berlin, increasingly isolated from both reality and his own command. The missed opportunity had symbolic and psychological weight. Military analysts later concluded that had Patton pushed decisively southeast at the end of March, he could have intercepted escape routes, cut off the remaining Nazi leadership, and forced a different reckoning. Even if Hitler had not been captured alive, the collapse of command in the south might have accelerated surrender, potentially saving lives and shortening battles in Bavaria and Austria. Reports from captured German officers reveal the depth of panic as American units advanced through towns that were previously thought secure. "They came from everywhere," one officer wrote. "We had no idea the enemy could reach here so quickly." Meanwhile, Patton's own diaries reflect a rare note of frustration, moments when he realized the distance between opportunity and reality could be measured in mere miles, hours, or decisions. Historians today debate the consequences of that divergence. Some argue the symbolic capture of Hitler could have dramatically altered post-war narratives, trials, and the early occupation. Others suggest the practical impact would have been limited. The Reich was already crumbling, and Hitler's eventual death was inevitable. What is indisputable, however, is how fragile the convergence had been. Geography, timing, and command decisions combined to create the closest historical possibility of Patton meeting Hitler, an encounter that might have rewritten the endgame of the European theater. This understanding sets the stage for a reflection on what the event, narrowly avoided, teaches us about the nature of warfare, decision-making, and history itself. History is often measured in decisive battles, treaties, and surrenders. Yet sometimes it hinges on moments that never fully occur, a turn not taken, a road bypassed, a decision deferred. The near encounter between George S. Patton and Adolf Hitler in the spring of 1945 is one such moment. It is a reminder that warfare is not only about firepower or strategy, but also about geography, timing, and the human choices that thread through both. In the end, Patton's relentless momentum and Hitler's constricted world never intersected. One general advanced with clarity and purpose. One dictator remained bound by fear, indecision, and shrinking options. The Third Army's armored columns and the Führer's retreating trains came close enough to imagine a different ending, but far enough apart to preserve history as it unfolded. This moment reflects a broader truth. War is shaped as much by near misses as by decisive clashes. It shows how leadership, psychology, and chance converge to create possibilities that may never materialize. In the narrow valleys of Bavaria, across frozen roads and collapsing bridges, history almost took a different course, and yet it moved forward without alteration. For humanity, it is a lesson in contingency. For technology and warfare, it is a testament to the power of speed, intelligence, and logistics in shaping outcomes. And for memory, it is a quiet story of how the paths not taken, just as much as those chosen, define the narratives we inherit. In that spring of 1945, one wrong turn could have changed everything. Instead, it became a near encounter remembered not for what happened, but for what almost did. A fleeting intersection of fate, strategy, and human will, a reminder that even in the final days of the deadliest war in history, chance still had its say.